right, Bob, we're back.
Another episode.
Two Guys in the Cloud, episode 20 something.
Yeah,
I
we're in the
know
20s.
I've even forgotten to count. So that tells you a ton, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yes. And before I announce our very special guest today, I want to acknowledge the fact that Blair, we've allowed to be on camera. So, from time to time, Blair may show up, our producer of the podcast, just so people know that Blair is real. And then they can actually, there he is, there you can see him. So for those of you that are watching on our YouTube channel, so that's a quick plug for our YouTube channel, you can see Blair, the mysterious Blair is here.
And his COVID beard, which is fairly new.
the beard tracker.
That's right.
Let's introduce our guest, Gavriella Schuster, Corporate Vice President at Microsoft, responsible for, I want to say one channel partner, but I'm sure there's a nuance behind that. But Gavriella, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Excellent. And
I'm going to do the Teams clap thing. Hold on a second.
Oh, yeah.
So now there we go.
Yep. So for those of you not seeing it, we're promoting a new feature on, well, I don't know how new it is, but promoting a feature on Teams where you can express your I don't know, emotion through very animated emoticons, in this case, hands clapping. So Bob was very happy to acknowledge Gavriella's joining us here. Thank you. So Gavriella, so we have a lot to talk about. And I know one of the things that we've sort of prepped you on is that we have a tradition here where what we like to do is ask the folks who are our guests to help us understand their journey in the technologies. Oh my God, that was water. Bob, finish sentence.
I didn't even see the frog jump into his throat. But
God, that's terrible.
So basically what we do is we ask our guests, to talk a little bit about their journey, how they got here, how you got into the IT industry, maybe how you've got into Microsoft. Obviously, you've been there 25 years, which is wonderful. And maybe just talk about how you got where you are today.
Sure. It's been a long time. My first official job out of college, I actually worked for Cigna Health Insurance, and I was responsible for the teams of people who process your healthcare claims, and so I realized after about 4.5, 5 years of doing that I actually was responsible for New York and national accounts, that I didn't want to spend my life in insurance. So
Smart.
Surprisingly enough, right? And at the time, I was living in Connecticut. My husband was living in New Jersey. We were dating, and we decided we wanted to move somewhere else and picked Seattle. So we came without jobs.
Wow.
And and that was a long time ago.
I'm sorry, I do this. I have a habit of ADD and I can't help it. But I have this immediate image. First of all, really cool to have picked Seattle. And I'm assuming, like without a job, right? So cool enough. Is this Pearl Jam era or is this pre-Pearl Jam? And I'm just saying, is this like you in the grunge rock days, or is
it was 1991?
Yeah, so that's it. That's hardcore. That's it. Sub Pop, awesome.
It seemed like a very cool place to live with a really high quality of life and more affordable than the East Coast. And my husband's a software developer, and it seemed to have kind of a budding software thing. And so we moved here. And so I got a job at a company called Aldus. And Aldus was one of the first desktop publishing companies, and based here in Seattle, and eventually got bought by Adobe. So I worked for Adobe from Seattle. And after 5 years of working there, realized that if I was going to further my career with Adobe, I would have to move down to Mountain View, California. And I didn't want to do that. So I made the move to the big, bad company over the water because at that time I was a Mac person.
Right. Of course you were. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's the evil empire. But I went because I actually had a ton of friends that had worked at Microsoft.
Yeah.
And so I joined Microsoft in 1995. And so I had no background in tech. My link to technology and even thinking about it was my husband, who was a software developer. And I started at Aldus and Adobe. What I did is I ran tech support and operations. And Microsoft hired me to outsource. Because it was the time of outsourcing, and we had to create fulfillment centers and take things that we wanted to have global. It was the very beginning of us having regional operation centers in different parts of the world, and Microsoft had no idea what to do with them. So I came in and helped Microsoft figure out what to do with them, and part of that was we had partners all around the world who were managed by marketing managers who managed them from Excel files. And this is the kicker. These partners actually sent money to each of these marketing managers. That was their marketing budget. And that was how we ran the partner program, right? And so where did the money go? Nobody knows, right? Yeah. It was very inconsistent. And we had big partners like Dell and HP who were like, we can't work with you like this. Yeah. And so I created the first Microsoft Partner Program by pulling all of this together, and I did it from operations. And so the person running marketing at the time said, it's kind of weird to have a partner program run out of operations. Maybe we should do that out of marketing. And I was like, great, I'll come over and do that out of marketing. So I moved into marketing. So that was really how I kind of started on my path. I did that partner program, then I moved into training and certification. It was kind of the beginning of certifications, created the Microsoft Certified Solution Developer Program. Then we were launching SQL 7. And that was going to be our big foray into the enterprise. And because it really wasn't the 7th version of SQL, it was like the 4th or 3rd version of SQL.
Marketing's marketing. Yeah,
but
right.
Marketing. Yeah. And we actually needed SQL DBAs. So I created a compete recruit program to take all the Oracle DBAs and help them become SQL DBAs. And then we were launching Windows 2000, and we needed Active Directory specialists. So I did another compete recruit program to bring Novell Active Directory specialists to Microsoft.
I feel this is great because I feel like I'm going through, I remember all these chapters, like the history. I'm like, this is great. I'm like going through all the episodes in my mind. It's awesome.
I love words like Novell.
Yes. Yes. Token ring.
Right. And while I was creating those programs and doing that customer and IT pro marketing, I had to create a mechanism for us to do that. And so I created what we now know as training vouchers, right? Okay. We had to have those in order to get these classes set up. And then I moved into enterprise services, which is MCS. And I helped our consultants to create a knowledge base of the engagements they had and turn them into repeatable deliveries, right? So that everything wasn't bespoke. And if somebody had created code as the result of working with a customer, we could actually turn that code back into something they could give to someone else. Yeah. And so through that, I worked on the Microsoft Solutions Framework, the Microsoft Operations Framework, and built something called the Microsoft Readiness Framework, which eventually just got folded into those. And then in, I think it was about 2000, Kevin Johnson had started the U.S. subsidiary. So it was the very first time we had a U.S. subsidiary. So up until then, our jobs in marketing were to do global design and strategy and U.S. execution. because we owned the US market. So then he started the US subsidiary, and he asked me to come over and work on something called Licensing 6.0. So he said, I don't know what this is, but it sounds like it's a big change and it's important, and I would like you to come help me with it. So I moved over to this US subsidiary, and I was like, oh, this is a big thing.
Yeah. This thing we don't know what it is. It's at least we know it's big, right?
Yeah,
Whatever
right.
it is. Yeah.
I was like, this is going to change the way we work with customers in a big way. And so it was the first time that we went from being kind of consumer packaged goods, box product into enterprise licensing. And we were only going to give our customers like 3 months for this transition. And that didn't work, right? And so we basically, I had to launch that puppy 4 times, right? We kept extending it and communicating. We finally got people to understand what was annuity licensing, what was an enterprise agreement, how could they buy things by, paid per desktop by their whole organization. It was a big thing. Learned a lot of lessons from that. Created software assurance to try and make that a more important or palatable thing for people to be buying. Created the open value program so that we could even get small business customers to buy that. And started creating value proposition for the enterprise versus by product. And so I did that. And after 5 years of doing that, decided I want to do something different. And I hadn't been in the product groups yet. So I moved over to the product groups, and I moved into the Windows client team at the time that we were struggling to launch Vista. So I don't know if you remember that saga, but it took us forever to get that product out. We had like 4 code names or something. And so we were going to launch that product, and we knew it was probably not going to be the greatest product. So I came over to try and figure out how could we sell this to the enterprise, right? And all of the application compatibility challenges that we were going to have. And so we found Softricity, which enabled you to do application virtualization, so you could still actually run the application in XP, but be running Vista. And so I started to do M&A work for the company, and we did a series of acquisitions, put them together. I put them together and led through the development of the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack that became a companion product to the Windows client, and actually became the reason why people bought Vista during the Vista time, and changed the marketing from talking about the client itself to talking about the optimized desktop around manageability and security. And so the reason you would buy the client as an enterprise was really for the servers. Right. Right. So I did that. I stayed through the development of Windows 7, launched Windows 7. That was a much better experience. I was asked to lead the organization then, so I became the general manager of our commercial business at that time, and then led up right through when we were ready to launch Windows 8. Windows 8 felt a little like a repeat of Windows Vista, and I didn't really want to do that again. So I moved over back to the US subsidiary to lead our cloud and enterprise business, which was System Center, SQL, Windows Server, and this tiny little incubation product called Azure.
Azure, I knew it. Yeah, right. Yeah, perfect.
Which at the time was we had about $10 million in revenue.
That is great. That's great. That is fantastic.
And so that became a big focus. Who knew, right? So I worked a lot with Satya. That was Bob Muglia, and then Satya took over. And what I realized with Azure was that we needed to get scrappy again, right? Because the way to sell Azure was the old way that we used to sell products, not the enterprise way, right? It was you had to go in department by department and help them understand what applications could do with the cloud and what the cloud was and how that worked. And so, kind of went backwards in time and had to build out also an ecosystem, right? Because there's no way our sellers cared about it, right? It was tiny. You only got paid when somebody used it, which like meant nothing to them, right? So we had to build out an ecosystem of partners that cared. So I built out our US Azure ecosystem. I got that product to hundreds of millions versus 10 million. And then an old boss of mine had taken over the worldwide partner team. And he said, hey, we have no cloud ecosystem except what you've done in the US. Can you come do this globally? And so I moved into the worldwide partner group to kind of redo the Microsoft Partner Network and build a cloud ecosystem. And then we changed things a lot. So we went from the worldwide partner group, then we went into the one commercial partner team, and then they asked me to lead the one commercial partner team, and then we brought 7 different groups that were managing partners at a global level all together. So I was managing all of our global ISVs and our global SIs, as well as all of our global channel partners, and so and then we've gone through many iterations of how do we manage that ecosystem, and I'm very happy to say that we now have 90,000 partners who are actively selling and thriving in the cloud. We have a cloud solution provider program that will reach $10 billion this year, and we have a very effective ecosystem. So that is how I got to where I am today.
Okay, so first, thank you so much for going through that journey. It was, fantastic to hear all of that, and I know that a number of people will want to have heard that story, and the detail you went in is fantastic. So thank you. As you were talking, it just was a big reminder to me, because I've learned that when we ask people to tell this story, it's always so interesting because there's never a straight shot into technology. There's always some really cool beginning, which in this case involved moving to Seattle and, just doing it because you wanted to move, which is really neat. And I've also realized that the technology industry, one of the gifts of this business is that it moves so fast. It's always rapidly evolving, and it's really conducive to somebody that's willing to raise their hand and say, yeah, I'll try that. I'll do that. I'll be innovative. I'll take a risk, and it seems to me as I'm listening to your journey that was sort of important, that every time there was some risk to take, you raised your hand. You said, I'll do that. And it seemed to build over time. Yeah. I just think it's cool.
Yeah, no, it is super cool, right? I mean, it's Microsoft. I thought I would only stay for 5 years because that's all I stayed at Cigna. That's all I stayed at Adobe. I thought it's probably about all I'll stay. But every time it was like joining a new company because it was something completely different. And I realized what I really love is starting new things up and or taking on things that are not working and refreshing them and starting them again.
Yeah, fantastic. So let's talk about, where you are today in terms of what's sparking your interest, what's new, this new challenge. What is the next challenge for you these days? Where are you spending your time?
Yeah, so one of the things that I realized when I became the corporate vice president for our commercial partners is that I had an opportunity to really champion and advocate for things that mean a lot to me. Satya said something that really hit home when he first became the CEO, and he said, sometimes, most of the time, you are working on behalf of the company. Sometimes you have a cause that the company can work on your behalf. And I realized that I was in a position where 300,000 organizations around the world were listening to what I had to say. And so it was an opportunity to really advocate for change around gender diversity within high tech. It is pathetic where we are. Most of my 30 years, I have been the only woman in the room. And I don't want other women to feel that way. But where we are today, they feel that way, right? So when I started in 1991, 36% of the computing industry jobs were held by women. In 2019, that number fell to 27%. So we're going in the wrong direction. Not only are we going in the wrong direction, but it's getting worse. It's getting made worse by the pandemic, where more women are dropping out of the workforce, and it's being made worse actually by digital transformation, because digital transformation enables every company to become a tech company. So it means that there are more jobs in tech, but the jobs that are being displaced by the tech disproportionately impact negatively women and people of color. And so you have this trifecta of badness happening, where you have fewer women joining tech, you have, by percentage, you have more jobs in tech, and you have more women being displaced by the technology. And so it means that we will never catch up unless we do something really, really significantly differently. And so in November, I went and delivered a TED Talk on this. And I created a very, very simple framework so that men can understand the actions they can take to change this. And it's I hate to say it, but it's on the men to make the change, because it's just not going to happen unless the whole industry makes that change and becomes an ally and focuses on this in an intentional way. And so I created this very actionable framework, and it's called Become. So it's very easy to remember. B, the BE, is about being an ally, being a leader, and being an agent of change. And then the COME of Become is connect, outreach, mentor, empower. So connection is about going in an intentional way and reaching out to women and bringing them into your network, right? LinkedIn makes that so easy. You can join groups like the Women in Cloud or the Women in Technology Network, and you can actively bring women into your network, which gives them access to you and everyone in your network. So that is one way. Access is powerful, and it's a way of really creating amplification, because the reality is that we need 8 million women to be in high tech to get to gender equity. That's a lot, right? So that's step one. The second step is more active, and that's about outreach. So that is about looking at your hiring practices, your recruiting practices, and your supplier selection practices, and making sure that you have diversity in those practices, so that you are screening in candidates for diversity versus screening them out. You're writing the right kind of job descriptions, that you have a diverse candidate pool before you start interviewing, and that you have a diverse interview panel, right? And that you require anyone that you hire to have, any supplier you hire to have diversity in the organization. And so that's the second thing. It's about outreach. The third one is mentorship. So once you are connected to these women, then mentor them, sponsor them, coach them, because you have different experiences than they have. And by learning from your experiences, by understanding some of those unwritten rules, by getting that feedback, by having the coaches, it brings them into the mainstream and makes them feel less ostracized, less alone, right? And so mentorship is critical. And then the last one is empower. And really, there's nothing more impactful you can do for another human being than empowering them. And it's a very simple thing to do to empower somebody. You listen to them, you value what they have to say, you amplify what they have to say, you lift them up and you echo and you bring them into the dialogue, you make sure they're included, and you create this inclusive environment, and by doing that, you empower them, and you enable them to then have a very rich experience, which has a multiplier effect, because then they tell their friends, and then other people join. And I mean, you know this because Insight does this very well. Insight is actually a very inclusive organization.
Yeah, it's and I'm hogging the mic, Bob, so please jump in. This, like, don't let me hog the mic. But I have been fascinated by this topic. And I have to admit, that I've been with Insight. We were part of the PCM to Insight acquisition, and so my time at Insight's now maybe 2 years, and we're close, coming up on 2 years. And I was immediately struck by how thoughtful the culture is when it comes to diversity and inclusion and harmony, and that those are words that we use, and we use them not arbitrarily. They're used consistently, and it's from the top down. Our CEO Ken Lamnick is very deliberate about this message, and it honestly caused me to do enough research to begin to get it. And I'm going to be very human for a moment. Like I grew up in a very small business atmosphere. It was very, like bottom line oriented. And I've never thought of myself as anything but just, I've never thought of myself as having a lens around that. It's just, hey, this is business, and we're almost a merit-based thought process on business, right? And when the D&I conversation came my way, the first thing I did when I looked at the research was understand something that I don't think gets communicated enough, which is that D&I has a positive impact on the business, period, end of sentence. Like there is this social justification, which is very real, and then there is, just from a pure business perspective, the reality that and there are tremendous stats on this in terms of the percentage of diversity and its impact to the bottom line, the impact of diversity on just even product development, in terms of having that voice in the mix. And I think that's an important value.
19% higher profitability, being able to get greater satisfaction from your customers, you get greater employee satisfaction. Yep.
Yeah, it's real. And I think that it's, and to me, that's important because, like I would, I want to do it regardless, right? But the point is that as a business person, you can balance this whole merit-based thought process by understanding that there is a business element to it as well. So, I think, I'm really glad that you're speaking towards it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's specifically for people like you, Elliott, where I talk to a lot of guys, and I'm like, why don't you do this more? And they're like, I don't know what to do, right? And I was like, okay, I'm going to give you 4 steps, 4 things. They're very easy. You can do them.
I get that a lot. That's fine. Elliott, just do this. That's fine.
So, Gavriella, when I was at Microsoft, I actually remember the news article when it came out that Microsoft wasn't very diverse. And I thought to myself, well, that can't be the case. And then I looked around the office, and it was a bunch of people that looked like me, right? And I said, wow, there really may be an issue here that I wasn't seeing, right? And to hear your journey was interesting because people would always ask me for advice. How long, how did you stay at Microsoft 16 years? Blah, blah, blah. What's the secret to success? And what I would tell them is do your role world class and then move to something else, right? Don't always stay there too long because there's always something new and you want to kind of reinvent yourself in the company. And at Microsoft, that's very, very important. And seeing your journey kind of validates that for me because of where you've been and what you've been through. The other thing that you mentioned, excuse me, is when you mentioned that a lot of the times you were the only woman in the room. And that was really interesting, right? Because you're obviously a leader at one of the US's most successful companies ever. And to see that and to feel that today is also interesting to me. And, from being a leader of my team, right, I try to take a lot of the leadership things that I learned at Microsoft and run that for my team, right? I like to have a very flat organization and I like to enable people through what you were saying, encouragement, giving them the power to be a leader and kind of owning the business, right? If you will. And so what you were saying really resonated with me. And the other thing was that I didn't realize that diversity in technology was getting worse. You mentioned that, and I thought you were going to say, well, it's getting better, baby steps. But I didn't realize the pandemic had such an impact on diversity in technology. And actually, that surprised me because I felt like it would have the opposite effect. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. I mean, and I think one of the things that really spurred me to action was that my daughter's 22. I thought by the time that she was ready to enter the workforce, things would be better for her, right? I was working to be a role model for her, and I thought things would be better. And then, like, to realize that things are actually worse now than they were when I started, I was like, I got to do something. Like, obviously, we've gone through a whole generation, and nothing's changed, right?
Yeah, right. Right.
So the goal is 8 million. It sounds like, I think I heard that before.
Yep.
So, speaking like a Microsoft person, what does that look like in milestones over the next 5 years? And what do we do to get there? What's the game plan?
Yeah, well, so I'll break it down for you. So there are 16 million people who work in technology, right?
Okay.
And so and 4 million, roughly 4 million are women. So we need to get to 8 million in order to get to equity. And that would mean we need an additional 4 million. How do we do that? Well, I think that since there are 8 million men, or actually 12 million men in technology today, if every single one of them mentored a woman and tried to bring them in, then by the time that happened, then, I mean, the whole industry will continue to grow, but maybe we start to make progress, right? So it means that, we have to mobilize all 12 million men who are in technology today to all do something to take those steps to bring a woman, just one woman, into the technology.
Yeah, I now I have a myriad of thoughts. One of them actually just came to us vis-a-vis our producer Blair, who just put something in the chat window, which is, I think in terms of STEM, and the focus of science, technology in our education, world. My wife's a teacher, so I'm like hearing about this all the time. And I guess it's my understanding that we're seeing an increase of women in the higher end of the university space proportionately to men. So I think that's, in terms of channel, like development of channel, and the notion of STEM and higher education getting a greater percentage of women aligned to that trajectory, that could also be an opportunity, right, in terms of changing the balance, right, the outcome of this. And if we look at I'm wondering, this is curiosity, if we look at like the positions in technology, and then let's break it into like developers, right, is the development percentage the same as sales, right? And I wonder if there's a difference in percentage of women in the development end versus the sales end, all in technology, right? But are we seeing growth in one sub area versus another?
Yeah, so there's a lot in what you just said. Right?
I know, and I'm sorry.
I'm going to start with high school, because I have some experience here. So my daughter was actually in the STEM program in her high school. And every year every quarter, she'd come to me and she'd say, I want to drop out. I was like, why? Do you not like it? Do you not like the classes? And she said, I actually like the classes, but I do not like the classrooms. She's like, I am like one of like 3 girls in my class. And I don't have any girlfriends, and the boys are just obnoxious. I don't want to be in classes like this, right? And I was like, keep at it, right? You love the class, just focus on that. Here's other ways you can, still foster your girlfriends and have friends and whatever. But that's still a problem.
Yeah,
right?
Well, boys are obnoxious. Just to be like, I don't know if that's going to change.
There's still not even enough girls going into STEM in the high schools to change that dynamic. And And so that's one thing. I think the other thing is that there isn't clarity, and we as a industry don't do a good enough job of championing the fact that there are thousands of jobs that are not a developer, right? Not a coder, because particularly for younger women, that doesn't fit what they think of as the way they want to spend their lives, right? Because the coder, and I think this is probably true of men too, right? The coder, the view of a coder, a developer, is that they sit in a dark room and they just type on code all day. They don't talk to people, right? And that does not sound like a very social engagement.
Right.
Right? That does not feel like a very collaborative environment. Now, the reality is that the way that technology is actually built and coded today is so different. And it is a collaborative engagement, and it is more like the communities, like the open source communities and the GitHub communities, and people working together and sharing code and everything, right? But we have to make that clear, because the curriculum in school still isn't like that. So the school curriculum hasn't caught up to the real life way that things are done. And so when you're sitting in school and you're thinking about your life and how you want to spend your life and how you want to spend your time, you don't understand the thousands of jobs you could have in technology. And you don't even understand what it really means to be a software developer today. Yeah. And so we need to change all of that in order to create the right pipeline. So pipeline is one thing, right? But the other thing is that we actually need to increase gender diversity in all levels of the organization. So we need more CEOs to put women onto their board of directors. We need organizations to hire women who are successful business leaders in to be business leaders of tech organizations, even if they don't have that tech background, because they come in with a new point of view and a different set of experiences and can bring the organization to a different place. And you see that a lot in the shift of technology buyers. You want people who are coming from the industries that you're selling to, right?
100%. Yeah.
And so that's an opportunity to bring women who have been successful leaders in other industries into tech companies and have them take the organization to a different place. And when you start, because you need women in leadership, because then as you get women coming up out of college looking at where they're going to work, they need to be able to see role models. They need to see that they could thrive in the organizations where they're going to go work.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, I mean, it's a very layered conversation. You know, there's no clear like one answer, of course, right? So that makes perfect sense. And the pipeline,
Elliott, just a quick thought on that before we leave it. There is a stigma with technology companies and not being just a regular company, right? And here's what I mean by that, right? Working at Microsoft, and when you're at a party, or we used to have parties, right, and saw people, when we're out and about, you would say you work at Microsoft. I'm like, oh, can you fix my PC? And I'd be like, no, sorry, I'm not technical, right? There is whether it's Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, name it. These are businesses that have marketing departments, HR departments, finance departments, right? Being in a technology industry doesn't mean you have to be, the Doritos and Mountain Dew developer that you're just mentioning, right? It's about really understanding that these are companies, very successful companies, where you can have a role that doesn't mean you're developing the next database. Right. So taking that stigma away and opening the doors, I think, is a big part of that. So absolutely agree with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, and I have to say that I think one of the keys to my success over the 30 years in technology, in many ways, but most specifically around this topic, was my husband, right? because he was a software developer, I would go into meetings with other software developers who really just wanted me to go away because I was the marketing person, not because I was a woman, but because I was the marketing person, right? And so they would say stuff like that would just try and dismiss me and say like, oh, that won't work, or oh, customers don't really need that, or oh, that can't be done. And I would come home to my husband and I'd be like, okay, so here's the situation. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's what the technology can do, I thought. But this is what they're telling me. And so what do I say? Are they right? Or is they blowing smoke, or what's up, right? And he would walk me through it and tell me how it could be done and what it was. And then I would go back and I'd be like, no, okay, so you're wrong. This is what you can do. This is how you can do it, right? And but for me, my husband was the coach who could, help me so that I could translate it back into words and a conversation that enabled me to get through.
Yeah. So what I was thinking about was, in terms of getting that pipeline to really understand the breadth of opportunity beyond just technology, and what is it that, I'm going to use Microsoft, but it could be any of us, right? What kind of campaigns can we insert into that channel? And I think in terms of, gosh, there must be an opportunity from a digital social perspective to create a campaign to show, that pipeline, those younger, female future candidates, this breadth, and the fact that it isn't, even if you want to get into the technology thing, the Doritos and the Coke and the dark, that there's this cool world out there. Is Microsoft doing something like that, or who's the leader in something like that, developing that pipeline?
Well, so it's really all about storytelling, right?
Yeah, perfect.
There's actually this really great TED Talk on, I think it's called like The Single Story. And it's this woman who talks about, and it's not about tech at all, but it talks about how when you only ever hear a single story, then you have a very colored view of what whether it's that race, that nation, that job, that industry is about. And so what you have to do is you have to hear a whole plethora of stories so that you can start to see yourself in that story. And so we have to do better storytelling. And so Microsoft is trying to do better storytelling around the many women who are successful at Microsoft and what they do. Mm-hmm. And, getting all of us to go out and tell our stories. And we need that to happen everywhere. Right? We just need that more. And we need it to infiltrate, because still in so many of the pictures, I mean, you look at all of the, you do any kind of search on any high tech company, and even the stock photos you see is a bunch of men.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. No. And what we know about even just sales, you got to say it over and over, the rule of 7, we've all heard it, you got to say it over and over again before it sticks. And it's just, it's a commitment to telling that story at a broad scale, but you're doing it, that's, you're here doing it right now, and you're telling your story. Just the beginning of this whole thing was a great story. So it's all part of that journey that you're embarking on. And I think it's fantastic. So I guess we're here wishing you well and excited for what you're doing here. Bob, I think we're at time. But I know that you've got tremendous words of wisdom as we wrap up.
Yeah, no, I just actually have one more question, and it's really the most important question of this whole podcast. Do you pick the bands for the partner conference? Because that is always, it seems to me to be a very, very tough decision every year.
I get to have input into the
very
band.
Good, very good.
But I don't get to pick them, right? Because there's a lot that goes into that.
I bet.
But yeah, generally it's like, well, here's a few that you could pick from.
Right. Here's the one that in budget, right?
Yeah, I have to say I cannot wait for the next, for those who don't know, it's called Inspire, and it's what was formerly the Worldwide Partner Conference, and it is just this great moment when a bunch of, at this point for me, it's just my friends, where we've just known and worked with each other for decades, and reconnect, and we talk about the, future vision of Microsoft and the ecosystem. And it's always been fantastic. And indeed, one of the best parts is the band. So I cannot wait to get back, to that reality. And I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. So my advice, make sure that you are not just connecting with all the people you always have, but that you're connecting with women.
That's right.
Bringing them into the meeting.
Yes, heard.
Bring them into every event that you do, every session that you join, every cocktail party that you have, so that it's a more inclusive environment.
That sounds perfect.
Perfect advice.
Yes,
Perfect
thank
advice.
you. So thanks again, Gavriella. We really, really appreciate you joining us here today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You bet.